Hello! In this video, I'm going to look at the case of Donoghue versus Stevenson, which happened in 1932. The purpose of these videos isn't really to teach you law, because I haven't actually studied law formally, but with these videos I'm hoping to maybe get some of your interest in law. Lots of law is like this, so you'll have a story and then it'll go to court. If it doesn't go to court, then I'd be interested as to why you're actually studying that in law. And we learn about what actually happened in court and what the court decided. This case in particular, Donoghue versus Stevenson, is particularly interesting because it is probably the first case you'll ever find out about if you look into tort law. It's kind of considered to be the main case, at least in my limited experience. It starts off in a cafe in a place called Paisley, and two women, one called Donoghue, another called something else, decide to go and meet and have a chat. Donoghue's friend orders her what's called a Scotsman ice cream float, which is the rather odd but perhaps nice tasting combination of ice cream and ginger beer. So the friend orders it, comes to the table, and Donoghue enjoys her ice cream and ginger beer. There's still some ginger beer left in the bottle, so after she's finished with the ice cream float, she pours it into a glass. And to her horror, she finds some rotting remains of what used to be a snail. Donoghue understandably reacts in disgust, saying that she was traumatised, and later saying that she suffered some sort of stomach infection, which I think might be pronounced gastroenteritis or something, but it's just basically a really bad stomach ache caused by bacteria. Obviously, Donoghue's very annoyed at this, as I'm sure you would be too if you found a rotting snail in your ginger beer. So, she decides to take it to court. She doesn't decide to take the owner of the shop to court. Instead, there is a label on the bottle saying where it's been bottled, and that is by a company owned by a Mr. Stevenson. They take it to court, and Donoghue essentially argues that Stevenson should have cared better for his product. He should have had better equipment to clean the ginger beer bottle, and in fact she should be compensated based on the damages she has received or incurred as a result of Stevenson's negligence and inability to perform his duty properly. On the other hand, Stevenson argues that Donoghue, one, is lying about the snail, that actually there wasn't a snail at all, but secondly that she's grossly exaggerating what actually happened. And I can understand that, because you see something horrible. I'm not quite sure if that would then give you a stomach bug. But that was diagnosed by a doctor, so that's purely speculation on my behalf. I'm not quite sure if saying that she was lying about the snail is a valid defence, especially when you then go on to say that she's exaggerating what was like her trauma and whatever, because it's kind of like saying, well, there wasn't a snail, but if there was a snail, then you're lying. You're better off just sticking with your defence if there was no snail at all, or actually moving on later. But anyway, that's just my uninformed input. Amongst all of these arguments, there is this massive issue of not being able to look at a product before use. So let's say I sold you a loaf of bread in clear packaging. It's really quite easy for you to see if I've just sold you a mouldy piece of bread. And so you can potentially decide not to eat that bread, or I hope in fact you decide not to eat that bread, without incurring any kind of damage. You're not going to really be traumatised by seeing some mould on bread. However, you may well be traumatised if you discovered you were eating a mouldy piece of bread. But that's of course something which you can't have with ginger beer, in some part because it's generally sold in a cloudy bottle, and also because you don't actually know that there was a snail in your drink before you've actually drunk it. What legal precedent was there then to try and deal with this issue? Because of course in English criminal law, English and Welsh, we tend to look at precedent. So if something's been ruled in the past, we tend to say, well, if we have a similar case, then we should deal with it in the same way. However, there wasn't that kind of precedent with Donoghue versus Stevenson, and this is for a few reasons. So usually in the past, these kind of issues would be dealt with in terms of breaching a contract. So let's go back to the analogy of me selling you bread. If I were to then sell you the dodgy bread, and you incurred some sort of damage as a result of it, you and I used to have a contract, or we still do have a contract, wherein I am meant to sell you something which isn't mouldy, and you're meant to give me currency which isn't fake, and as a result I've breached that contract, and we can deal with it through that. However, going back to the story again, Donoghue didn't actually buy anything from anyone, it was her friend. So the person who incurred the damages isn't the same person that has a contract of sales. There was also precedent in existence about the misrepresentation of danger. This doesn't really apply here because there's not that aspect. No one attempted to misrepresent the danger of this ginger beer because, quite frankly, nobody knew that there was a snail in the ginger beer, so that wouldn't have applied very well here either. And also, negligence prior to Donoghue versus Stevenson was largely considered to be an act against your obligations in terms of the law, which basically means that in order for me to commit negligence, I was doing something against a current piece of legislation. Of course, this isn't something that really applies here because in allowing a snail to come into a bottle of ginger beer, Stevenson isn't actually doing anything contrary to the law. Instead, he's kind of just not paying an adequate amount of attention. Also, of course, Donoghue would argue. This case went all the way up to the House of Lords. In fact, it went to the Court of Appeals, I believe, and then Stevenson won, but Donoghue pushed for the case to be heard in the Lords. Unfortunately, she was too poor to be able to pay for any legal fees, so that was all done pro bono, and it was eventually heard in the Lords. This is the first case, I believe, that I've done on this channel which looks at the House of Lords. The House of Lords isn't currently the highest court in England anymore. It's the Supreme Court, and the highest criminal court is obviously the European Court of Justice. But before, you used to have the House of Lords, and you'd have 5 senior judges presiding over a case. They would then go either way. You'd of course need a 3-2 majority to win the case. And how these things tend to work is each judge gives a verdict of their own opinion. Before I was really interrupted by that guy coming and knocking at my door and giving me a parcel, which isn't something very rude at all. I was talking about how the House of Lords works, how the judgments are given. So each lord gives their own verdict, and they generally tend to speak it. And you know, if you're a lord, you can have the option of just agreeing with another lord, because sometimes that's easier than coming up with your own statement. In this case, it was ruled that it was ruled in favour of Donoghue by an order of 3-2, or I suppose you could word it as against Stevenson. What Lord Atkins said, he was one of the judges in favour of Donoghue, is perhaps one of the most important pieces of common law in existence in this country, especially in regards to tort. And he said that all of us have a duty of care to our neighbours in order to prevent doing harm which we can reasonably foresee happening to them. Now, what does that actually mean? Does that actually mean that I have a legal obligation to the person who lives next to me? Well, he then went on to say that in law, your neighbour is anyone that you can reasonably foresee to have to be impacted by your actions or your inactions. This was huge, as I'm sure you can imagine, because it's not just about relationships between one person and another for a contract of sales. It's massive. In putting this video out, I am reasonably foreseeing that a few people could watch it, and so I, to some extent, owe you a duty of care not to show you a really disgusting image at the end of this video and make you all sick, I guess. And that's crazy to think that we all in some way are interconnected, at least of course in Lord Atkin's opinion. It's often joked about that this case is all about a widower who found it is about a widow who found a snail in her ginger beer. And some people have said, well, the best solution to this problem is to stop selling ginger beer in opaque bottles. Of course, this just shows you how cool law is, because this huge precedent can come out of this really minor, insignificant event in a cafe in Paisley. And just going forward, I think this case shows you so much about how the House of Lords and how law in general can begin to set norms. It's just generally accepted that we all have some sort of an obligation not to do things which can cause other people harm, and that in some part is owed to this case. I hope you found this interesting and perhaps useful if you're considering applying to read law. Please like the video if you liked it, feel free to dislike it if you disliked it, and stick around to see more of my content by subscribing. Subscribing. That's what I want to say. Take care. I'll see you next time.